Welcome to an industry beneath their feet. I'm Norman Kelly. When Americans think about black music, they usually think about talent. They think about Louis Armstrong, Billie Holiday, Little Richard, James Brown, Aretha Franklin, Motown, hip hop. What they rarely think about is ownership. Who owned the copyrights? Who controlled the distribution? Who financed the companies? Who owned the pressing plants? Who controlled the radio promotion? Who collected the royalties? Today's episode isn't primarily about musicians. It's about institutions. It's about the structure of music exploitation. It's about how one of the world's most influential musical traditions repeatedly generated enormous wealth while ownership of that wealth migrated elsewhere. It's about how some can exploit others and then how others do not take advantage of their own skills and talent to their own benefit. Throughout this episode, we'll examine several historical moments, from 19th century copyright appropriation to Black Swan records, from radio to Motown, and finally the Congressional Black Caucus and the NAACP. The running question throughout them is remarkably consistent. How did black creativity become one of America's greatest economic resources without producing comparable black institutional power? Law professor Kevin J. Green offers a useful framework for understanding the history of black music exploitation. Rather than seeing exploitation as isolated incidents, Green identifies recurring patterns. The first is straightforward theft. Someone else simply claims ownership of work created by black artists. Green calls this the Frankie Lyman pattern. The second pattern is subtle. Black artists create revolutionary music, but because of unequal bargaining power, they sign away copyrights, publishing rights, or ownership. Little Richard, Chuck Berry, many others. The music remains theirs creatively, the property does not. The third pattern involves something larger than individual songs. Entire musical styles originate within black communities. Ragtime, jazz, rock and roll, rhythm and blues, hip-hop. The innovations transforms American culture. Yet the greatest commercial rewards frequently flow towards performers, publishers, distributors, and corporations outside the originating communities. The fourth pattern reaches back even further, minstrelsy. Black expressive culture becomes imitated, distorted, commercialized, and resold to mainstream audiences. These patterns are not isolated events. They become structural features of the American entertainment economy. Once you recognize them, they appear repeatedly across more than a century of music history. Consider an incident from 1855. Richard Milburn, a black guitarist and whistler from Philadelphia, demonstrated bird calls for the white musician Septimus Winter. Winter transcribed the melodies. Milburn reportedly received $5. The published composition, Listen to the Mockingbird, earned roughly $100,000. Whether every detail survives historical scrutiny, the story illustrates something fundamental. The valuable asset wasn't merely a performance, it was ownership. The person who owned the composition owned the future income. This distinction between labor and property becomes one of the central themes throughout music history. Musicians often focus on performance. Publishers, however, focus on intellectual property. Those are not the same thing. One of the recurring questions throughout this series is simple. Who really owned black music? To answer that question, we have to spend less time looking at singers and more time looking at publishers. One of the most influential figures you've probably never heard of is Irving Mills. Mills wasn't remembered because he sang. He wasn't remembered because he played the trumpet like Louis Armstrong or piano like Duke Ellington. He became powerful because he understood something artists often didn't: copyright. During the Tin Pan Alley era, music simply wasn't sold as performances. It was sold as intellectual property. Whoever controlled the publishing company often controlled the music. Mills frequently became co-composer on songs written by the musicians he managed. Sometimes he contributed ideas. Sometimes he contributed little beyond business management. Yet his name appeared alongside the artist, and that meant publishing royalties. This wasn't necessarily illegal. In many cases, the contracts were perfectly legal, but legality and fairness are not always the same thing. Irving Mills represents a transition in American music from artistic economy to a rights economy. The public saw Duke Ellington. However, the industry profited owning the publishing rights. The audience applauded performances. The publishers counted royalties. That distinction matters because it foreshadows one of the central themes we have discussed throughout this presentation. Ownership often proved more valuable than creativity itself. Kevin Green identifies what he calls the Little Richard and Chuck Berry pattern. It is one of the 4 recurring patterns of appropriation in American music history. The pattern is straightforward. A black artist creates something genuinely innovative. The innovation changed American culture. Then, through contracts, publishing, transfers, or managerial pressure, much of the long-term wealth generated by that innovation flows elsewhere. Chuck Berry didn't invent rhythm and blues. He didn't invent the electric guitar. What he did invent was the vocabulary. His guitar intros, his songwriting, his storytelling, his stage presence, his teenage narratives. Together, they became the language of rock and roll. Listen to early recordings by the Beatles. Listen to the Rolling Stones. Listen to countless garage bands. Chuck Berry's fingerprints are everywhere. In 1955, Alan Freed, a radio disc jockey on New York's WINS, recognized Chuck Berry's talent that was displayed in one of his flagship songs of rock and roll, Maybelline. He began playing the song, but was incentivized to do so when the owners of Chess Records, which produced and distributed Maybelline, gave Freed co-writing credit in the song. Green argues that Berry exemplifies a larger structural pattern rather than an isolated injustice. Innovation originates with black creators. Ownership frequently migrates elsewhere. The lesson isn't simply that Berry was exploited. The lesson is that artistic innovation alone does not guarantee economic power. Without ownership of publishing, copyrights, masters, or licensing, creativity can generate fortunes for other people. Few Americans have influenced popular music more than Otis Blackwell, yet many people have never heard his name. That's because Otis Blackwell represents another paradox in the recording industry. He became enormously successful as a songwriter while remaining largely invisible to the public. Think about the songs he wrote: Don't Be Cruel, All Shook Up, Great Balls of Fire, Return to Sender. These weren't simply hits. They became part of American culture. Millions recognized Elvis Presley. Millions recognized Jerry Lee Lewis. Far fewer recognize the songwriter behind many of these records. Blackwell demonstrates something important about the music business. Fame and ownership are different forms of capital. Performers receive applause. Songwriters receive royalties. Presley's manager, Tom Parker, extorted half of Blackwell's publishing rights from him by forcing him to give it up to Presley's publishing company if Blackwell wanted Presley to perform his songs. When the songwriter retains publishing, those royalties can continue for decades. When the songwriter loses publishing, the revenue follows the copyright holder instead. Otis Blackwell reminds us that the music industry is built upon layers of labor. There are performers, producers, arrangers, session musicians, publishers, lawyers, licensing companies. Behind every famous recording lies an economic structure determining who will continue earning money long after the applause has ended. We have spent some of this series discussing artists who have lost ownership. Dolly Parton offers a different story. She understood very early that songs could become appreciating assets. Rather than treating songwriting as simply another part of performing, she treated copyright as long-term property. Her most famous example is I Will Always Love You. When Elvis Presley wanted to record the song, Tom Parker, once again, reportedly demanded half of the publishing. Many artists would have accepted. Presley guaranteed enormous exposure. Dolly Parton refused. It is one of the most consequential business decisions in popular music history. Years later, Whitney Houston recorded the song for The Bodyguard. The recording became one of the biggest selling singles in history. Because Parton retained ownership, she benefited directly from that extraordinary success. Her story illustrates a principle often overlooked in discussions of popular music. The most valuable moment in a song's life is rarely its first recording. A successful copyright can generate income through recordings, films, television, streaming, commercials, and licensings for a generation. Dolly Parton's career demonstrates that saying no to a bad contract can sometimes become more profitable than saying yes to the immediate fame. Ownership delayed can produce wealth multiplied. One of the hard lessons in the history of popular music is that talent usually arrives before business knowledge. That was true for black artists, but it was also true for the Beatles. When Brian Epstein discovered and managed John, Paul, George, and Ringo, they were young men focused on writing songs, making records, performing, and becoming successful. They were not trained in music publishing, copyright licensing, or long-term catalog control. That ignorance mattered. The Beatles' early publishing arrangements eventually produced Northern Songs, the company that controlled much of Lennon McCartney's catalog. But the Beatles did not fully control the company. Over time, business managers, publishers, and investors gained leverage over the songs themselves. The lesson is not that the Beatles lacked intelligence. The lesson is that musical genius and business sophistication are not the same thing. The Beatles represents young artists who did not yet understand the system. This is the lesson. In the music business, the people who understand ownership often outlast the people who merely create the music. One of the great mysteries is how the Beatles' catalog wound up in the hands of Michael Jackson, but that's a story for another episode. If the Beatles' loss of their music catalog was due to mismanagement, let's turn to another form of mismanagement by enslavement. One of the most revealing stories in American music history isn't about a record contract. It isn't about copyright. It isn't about royalty. It happened before any of these institutions even existed. It is the story of Thomas Blind Tom Wiggins. If this series is about the structure of music exploitation, then Blind Tom represents its earliest and clearest prototype. He shows us that while the legal mechanisms change, the underlying economic relationship remained remarkably consistent. Tom Wiggins was born enslaved in Georgia in 1849. Blind from birth and almost certainly autistic, he displayed an astonishing musical memory as a young child. By simply hearing music once, he could produce it almost perfectly on the piano. General James Neal Bethune, who owned Tom and his family, quickly recognized that this child was more than just another enslaved laborer. Tom was an economic asset. The Bethunes trained him, exhibited him, rented him out to concert promoters, and transformed him into one of the most successful performing musicians in 19th century America. The money, however, did not belong to Tom. It belonged to the people who owned him. Even during slavery, Tom's career anticipated something that would later become common throughout the music business. The performer generated the value. Someone else owned the revenue. As the structure of music exploitation model argues, value flowed upward while the creator remained at the bottom. Then came the Civil War. Slavery was abolished. On paper, Tom Wiggins became free. But here's where the story becomes even more revealing. Freedom did not produce independence. Instead, ownership simply changed form. Following emancipation, the Bethune family did not simply walk away from the enormously profitable position they had spent years cultivating. Instead, legal mechanisms replaced slave ownership, contracts, guardianship, declarations of mental incompetence, court orders. Rather than owning Tom as property, they managed to retain control over him through the law. In effect, slavery evolved into custodianship. The legal battles after the Civil War demonstrates how adaptable systems of exploitation can be. Black entrepreneur Tabbs Gross attempted to wrest control of Tom away from the Bethunes through the courts. He failed. A probate judge ruled that Tom was mentally incompetent and returned control of him to the very family that had previously owned him as a slave. The 13th Amendment had abolished slavery, but it did not abolish economic domination. The story becomes even stranger. After John Bethune died, his divorced wife, Elsa Stutzbach Bethune, successfully obtained legal guardianship over Tom in 1887. Think about what this means. A formerly enslaved musician, legally free for more than 20 years, was still being managed by the extended family of his former owners. The institution had changed, the beneficiaries had not. For the structure of music exploitation, this is the critical transition. Under slavery, white Americans owned black musical labor directly. After emancipation, they increasingly controlled it indirectly. Managers replaced slaves. Guardians replaced owners. Contract replaced bill of sales. The legal vocabulary changed. The flow of wealth did not. Tom Wiggins eventually spent his later years performing in vaudeville, no longer celebrated as a concert phenomenon, but increasingly exhibited as an oddity. He died in 1908, yet his importance extends far beyond his remarkable musical gifts. Blind Tom reveals the original architecture of music exploitation in America. First came ownership, then legal guardianship. Later came management contract, publishing agreements, recording contract, corporate control. Different legal form, the same economic logic. And that's why Blind Tom Wiggins belongs not simply to the history of slavery, he belongs to the history of the American music industry. The commercial history of black music changed dramatically in 1920. If Helen of Troy had a face that launched 1,000 ships, Mamie Smith had a voice that sold 1 million records. Mamie Smith records Crazy Blues. It sells over 1 million copies. This is an extraordinary event, not simply because of the record itself, but because it demonstrates something the major record companies had ignored. There was a national black consumer market. 1 year later, Harry H. Pace established Black Swan Records. Black Swan represented something unprecedented, a black-owned record company attempting to compete nationally. Pace wasn't merely a businessman. He had worked with W.B. Du Bois. He had collaborated with W.C. Handy. Later, he would become successful in banking and in insurance. Black Swan, therefore, represents something larger than entertainment. As a race record company, it represented institutional ownership. Yet Black Swan confronted enormous structural disadvantages. It lacked capital. Its distribution network was weak. White-owned companies controlled pressing plants, wholesalers, retailers, and advertising channels. Once white-owned record companies realized how profitable race records could become, they aggressively entered the market. The competition wasn't simply artistic, it was structural. Black Swan also struggled with a philosophical dilemma. Should it emphasize respectable concert music and spirituals, or should it pursue commercially successful blues recording? Ethel Waters' Down Home Blues demonstrated where consumers' demand actually existed. Eventually, Black Swan collapsed. Its catalog ended up under the white ownership. Still, the company achieved several lasting accomplishments. It demonstrated that black ownership was possible. It forced major record companies to recognize black consumers. It encouraged race record catalogs. It increased advertising in black newspapers. However, one point deserves emphasis. The Chicago Defender credited Black Swan with creating the market. Yet one could argue the market had already been demonstrated by Mamie Smith's million-selling record. In other words, black consumers, not Black Swan alone, proved the existence of a profitable national market. That distinction matters because it shifts attention from entrepreneurial symbolism towards consumer economics. Motown is frequently celebrated as a cultural success story, and rightly so. Berry Gordy built one of America's greatest independent music companies. Sales climbed rapidly during the 1960s. Millions became tens of millions. Yet, perspective matters. Even while Motown experienced spectacular growth, companies such as Columbia, Capitol, and RCA Victor remained substantially larger. This illustrates another structural point. Success should not be confused with market dominance. An outstanding independent company can still operate inside an industry whose commanding heights remain elsewhere. That distinction becomes increasingly important as the industry consolidates during the late 1960s and early 1970s. But here's the larger story that often gets overlooked. By the second half of the 1960s, it wasn't just Motown that was succeeding. Black artists throughout the recording industry were reaching the top of the Billboard pop charts. James Brown was transforming rhythm and blues into a harder, more rhythmic style that would later become the foundation of funk. Records like Papa's Got a Brand New Bag, I Got You, I Feel Good, Cold Sweat, and Say It Loud, I'm Black, I'm Proud reached audiences far beyond traditional R&B listeners. Atlantic Records, Aretha Franklin redefined soul music, beginning with I Will Never Love a Man, followed by Respect, Chain of Fools, Think, and Natural Woman. She became one of the biggest recording artists in America, not simply one of the biggest black artists. Then came Sly and the Family Stone. Unlike almost any major act before them, Sly's group was racially integrated, included both men and women, blended rock, soul, gospel, psychedelic music, and funk, and spoke directly to the cultural upheavals of the late 1960s. Songs like Dance to the Music, Everyday People, Stand, and Hot Fun in the Summertime became national pop hits. As black music generated an even larger share of the industry's profits, the major corporations increasingly recognized its value. They did not simply distribute black music, they began incorporating it into their own corporate structure. The business structure would determine who won the economic one. One of the great ironies of the Black Power era is that black Americans were fighting on almost every economic front except for one. While black activists were mobilizing around voting rights, community control, education, and black capitalism, the recording industry was quietly becoming one of the most profitable sectors built upon black creativity. Yet almost no major black political organization made ownership of the recording industry a central political issue. Activists demanded community control of schools. They demanded black-owned businesses. They demanded political representation. They demanded voting rights. They demanded black studies programs, community development corporation, cooperative economics, and what came to be called black capitalism. Yet one of the faster-growing industries based upon black labor and black creativity, the music recording industry, rarely became the object of sustained political attention. Remarkably, very few black political organizations treated the recording industry as a strategic economic institution worthy of organized political attention. The contrast becomes even clearer in the early 1970s. Around 1971 and 1972, researchers associated with Harvard University examined the extraordinary commercial success of soul music. Their report recognized something many activists had not fully appreciated. Black music had become enormously profitable and strategically important to the major recording companies. These companies were no longer ignoring black music. They were incorporating it into their own corporate structures. By the 1970s, the major record companies had largely incorporated black music into their own corporate structures. This represents a shift. The issue increasingly became not exclusion from the industry, but incorporation into it, or capture. The NAACP's 1987 report, The Discordant Sound of Music, examined employment opportunities inside the music industry. That concern was understandable, but another question remained largely unexplored. Who owned the industry? Employment and ownership are different. Representation inside corporation differs from control over corporations. Those are separate forms of economic power. That distinction continues to shape debates today. Yet, despite the enormous commercial success of black music, neither the Congressional Black Caucus nor most national civil rights organizations developed a sustained legislative agenda focused on the music recording industry itself. Imagine what an agenda might have looked like. Congressional oversight hearings on recording contracts, hearings on copyright ownership, investigation into publishing practices, studies of radio consolidation, federal attention to distribution monopolies, programs to encourage black ownership of recording labels, publishing companies, and distribution networks. These conversations were rarely occurred. Instead, music largely remained a fundraising vehicle for black activities. Artists performed, celebrities attracted audiences, money was raised, then everyone returned to their separate worlds. Politics remained politics. The music business remained the music business. The connection between them was never really institutionalized. Instead of treating black music merely as entertainment or even as cultural expression, it could have been organized as a permanent economic constituency with allies in Congress, corporate America, and the civil rights movement. History took a different path. The concerts ended, the fundraisers ended, the relationships faded, but the question remains. What might have happened if the political leadership of black America had treated the recording industry with the same strategic importance that it gave to voting rights, education, housing, or small business development? That may be one of the most unanswered questions in the history of black music. Looking across this history, several themes repeat. Innovation without ownership, creativity without capital, markets without institutional control. From Richard Milburn to Harry Pace, from Mamie Smith to Motown, from the NAACP to the Congressional Black Caucus, the recurring issue isn't simply artistic achievement, it is political economy. Understanding black music requires looking beyond performers and songs. It requires understanding copyright, distribution, finance, corporate control, ownership, because industries are built not only by talent, but by institutions. Thank you for listening to An Industry Beneath Their Feet. I'm Norman Kelly.